Thanks for the great night.
Bye.
Bye. Drive safe.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the April Campfire Talk. I'm Level, the placement manager for Black Rock City, and I know there's some news today that we all are sitting with about Black Rock City not happening in 2021. So I just wanted to acknowledge that before we hop into talking about consent, because I'm sure that's top of mind for folks. I'd love to have folks introduce yourselves in the chat. The prompt here is, how are you feeling about this news about 2021 not happening? How are you feeling today, right now? What kind of things do you feel like you need or your camp needs right now? If there's anything that camp support as a team could do in this next period for you all, please put that in chat too. So I know that's a lot. It's a lot of questions, but yeah, please introduce yourselves, throw your name in there, what camp you're with, and what are you thinking? What are you feeling? What's your camp thinking and feeling? I will stop chattering for a minute so that you all can think in silence and put things in chat. Also, if you have a minute of pause from typing, if you can rename yourself with the name of your camp in your name, that would be also helpful so that we know who you're affiliated with and who's in the room. Great, so hello, Adam. Hello, Buttercup. Hello, Rat Lady. All right. It is very nice to see you all. I don't know if you recognize where I am, but I am actually at Burning Man headquarters in San Francisco, which is a treat, and not in a fake background, which I usually am in. So yeah, hello from San Francisco here. Yeah, the news today was important, and I think that, you know, over the next period, we want to be thinking about how can we still connect, how can we still burn, how can we still keep the culture alive, as more and more people come into, you know, kind of a more open economy and society, even though we know that many parts of the world are still battling with a pandemic. You know, there's ways that we want to be able to show up for people. And when I say we, I think the collective we, but also the camp support volunteer we. So thank you all for sharing how you're feeling. I know there's some disappointment and sadness, but also support and understanding for the decision made today. Yeah, I just want to be clear, this isn't a Q&A session about that decision, so I know you might be looking for answers from me. So I asked for your understanding around my boundary around that today, since we're talking about consent. And but I do want to give people some time to process with each other. So we're gonna start with breakout groups, and we're gonna put 4 or 5 people in those groups. Use this as a chance to get to know your fellow breakout group member, and maybe actually verbalize and process, you know, this decision with a fellow burner. So, you know, what are you thinking and feeling? I know folks have been typing it in chat, but also do that in the group. And we'll give about 10 minutes. So hopefully that breaks out to 2 to 3 minutes per person to chat and share the space, share the air. So let's do that. Regular, do you want to go ahead and set up those groups? Great. So I would say just click join And if you get stuck here, we'll help you navigate into that room. But we'll see you back here in 10 minutes. All right, we got some folks that did not go. Okay, they're on their way. Bubba Monkey. If you can hear this, you might need to hop on your phone or your computer and press join to join your breakout room. Okay, pause the recording for now. Monday, Captain Vic, do you want to go to a room too, or do you want to stay here?
Not really.
Okay. Regular, are you keeping time, or would you like me to keep time?
I think we sent people at 5:07, so I was going to do 5:17.
Okay, great.
Level, did you say the Burning Man's moving out of their offices?
We are moving out of, there's like 2.5 floors here, and so we're moving out of 1 floor.
Okay.
So not 100%. Oh, Breedlove has joined us. Hi, Breedlove. We're actually in breakout groups at the moment, where people are checking in for 10 minutes and processing kind of the news of the day.
Cool. You know, I'm guessing this is your I forget what you're calling the theme camp thing, but one of my campers actually just texted me that they were on the fireside chat, and I didn't remember it was tonight, and so they sent me the link, and so that's why I jumped in to just say hi. So
awesome. Is it Bianca that messaged you?
Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah.
She's on our panel.
Cool. Well, nice to see you in the office as well.
Yeah. Of course you would recognize it. Everyone else is like, I don't know where you are. I just have a poster of.
Well, I don't mean to interrupt. I'm just gonna, if it's cool, I'm just gonna hang out and kind of listen. I'm doing some stuff in the background, but I'd love to hear what people are kind of saying after such a big day.
Yeah, we'll see. Oh, you can't see the history of chat. Regular, as people come in, if you want to shoot them into a breakout.
I am doing that.
Okay, great. Hey everyone, we're having people in breakout. So if you're joining us a little late, we're just checking in, talking about the news of Black Rock City not happening this year. We'll send you to a breakout room. So please just join the group and say hello.
Yeah, Level, can you hear me?
Hey, Captain Vic. Yes.
No. I'm having problems with my video. I don't know. It wasn't working yesterday and it's not working today.
Oh, no.
But at least I can hear you guys. So I feel bad for the staff with this this latest development. We're worried about you guys. I mean, it's bad for us, but it's way worse for you.
Well, I appreciate the concern. I think that we're going to get through it. I mean, I think that there's donors on board, and I'm only sharing this with you, Captain Vic. I know I said this isn't a Q&A, but it's because you are obviously a trusted volunteer. But yeah, I appreciate the concern, and I think we're going to see how it all falls out.
Well, we're gonna, those of us on the council want to continue the work, you know, through the next year. We're not going to bail out, and we feel committed to the mission. And you let us know how we can help.
Absolutely, absolutely.
We want, you know, trying to keep the organization as healthy as possible.
Absolutely. We can chat more about, you know, what that looks like post campfire talk.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'm here on the Campfire talk because I was hoping to pick up a couple of people that might write stories, or we would write stories about camps that are dealing with consent. That's my agenda for being on the call.
Yeah.
I'd love to get a story about or two about camps and how they deal with consent in their camp, and especially if it gets beyond the broader spectrum of consent. I think it'd be very interesting.
Yeah, beyond just like physical consent.
Yeah, I mean, that's important.
Hey, Laszlo. Oh, your mic is not working, or
Any better?
oh, there you go. We hear you now.
So I just had to move my office and a couple of things didn't get plugged in, it looks like.
No worries. You're loud and clear now. Most people are in a breakout room, just getting acquainted with some other camp folks. So would you like to be sent to one and join them? Okay. Regular, were you able to do that, or?
Yeah, I tried to move Laszlo to room number 4. It says he hasn't joined.
Okay, Laszlo, I don't know if you see a prompt saying join, but if you do see that, press that button. Hi, Lee. Welcome to the talk. People are just in breakout room right.
If you can send me the one Lefty's in, I'd appreciate it.
Try again.
Oh, there we go.
Anything like that you want to share, put that in chat. And hello, Jack. I don't know who Jack, I don't see a Jack, but.
No, you were talking about it getting hijacked, so I said hijacked.
Oh, sorry.
Dad jokes.
Yeah. All right, I think we have everyone back. So welcome back, everyone. I hope you got to meet someone new and made a brief connection with the people in your breakout. Let me also say one thing, that this session is recorded. So if you have concerns about being on camera, feel free to turn that off. But I did want to make sure people were aware that this is being recorded. Okay, I'm going to shift gears because tonight's Campfire talk, before we ever knew that today's news was going to happen, has been planned to talk about consent. The topic and the title is "A Mom, a Dom, and a Priest Walk into a Bar, Expanding Consent Beyond Sex." Tonight's Campfire talk is on subtle areas of consent and for camps who want to up their competencies in welcoming the stranger. We will explore the tension between radical self-expression and our desire to create communities of safety and inclusion as we move forward. So we have a great panel for you tonight. If you're on the West Coast, it's becoming tonight. First, I'm going to introduce Lefty. Lefty, if you want to unmute yourself and just say hi so people can see who you are.
Good evening.
There we go. So Lefty is a lead organizer of And Then There's Only Love, a Burning Man camp who's better known for their playa gift, Orgy Dome. So hello, Lefty. Thanks for joining us today. Next, we have Stan. Stan, do you want to unmute yourself and say hi?
Hi, everybody.
Great. Stan Clausen is a 10-time burner, a lover of life, and the former chairman and ballyhoo captain for Utah's Element 11 Regional Burning Man event. So thanks, Stan, for joining us today. Next, we have Bianca. Bianca, would you like to unmute yourself?
Hello.
Hey, Bianca. Bianca is a decade-long burner, mother of one mini burner, and lead boss for Solar Beats Art Car. Her everyday occupation is in the cannabis industry, running a seed-to-smoke hemp business called Society's Plant. She is paving the way to normalizing cannabis use for mothers through her social media channels under the name Hi Society Mama. So hello, Hi Society Mama.
Thank you. Hello.
Next, we have Brian. Brian.
Hello.
Brian is the founder of Religious as Fuck, a camp that offers non-judgmental, non-commodified Christian spiritual hospitality and worship. Brian is a priest in the Episcopal Church and helped lead his dominion into full marriage equality. Awesome. Hello, Brian. Brian's also a newer volunteer to the Campfire Talks production team. So welcome to the team. And then finally, we have Andrea. Her pronouns are she, her, or they, them. Andrea has been a theme camp organizer. I'm sorry, Andrea, before I go into all that, please unmute and say hello.
Hi, everyone.
There we go. All right. Andrea has been a theme camp organizer for 2 years and volunteers with Alternative Justice and Second Life, helping communities find solutions for accountability and restorative justice beyond the court system and incarceration. So that's your panel for today. Just in terms of how this is going to flow, if you've been to a Campfire talk in the past, we generally have allowed for participants to kind of join in the discussion. But what we want to try to today is actually allow the panelists to talk for a good part of the conversation for about 40 minutes, and then we'll open it up for Q&A at the very end. So if you have a question, please stick it in chat. We have Christian who's volunteering to collect all those questions, and we'll field them at the very end. So we have great panelists with a lot of experience, so want to get good content out to help all of us. All right, so with that, I'm going to kick us off with our first question for the night for our panelists, which is, what is consent? How would you define it? And yeah, I'm just going to keep it open-ended for now because I have further prompts from there. So how would you define consent? And for our panelists, if you want to just raise your hand, I will keep an eye out for it. Let me pick someone to kick it off then. Oh, there we go, Lefty. Thank you, Lefty. How do you define it?
Well, I guess as the sex camp on the group, I will kick off the idea of consent in the better sense. And I think that what we've done, and collectively we in this community has grown what that idea is. In the beginning, consent meant the absence of a no, right? That was the dark ages. So what did we do? We created this idea of enthusiastic or active consent, where you needed to, which means, it wasn't just that you were not impaired, you were able to give consent and revoke consent, but you actively said yes. But I think the title of this is beyond that and beyond consent. And so, when we created this higher standard, we created a binary condition of you either have consent or you don't. You're either able to give consent because you're impaired, or you're sober and you can or you can't. And that kind of binary nature, while it moved us forward, it's created other problems of, if there's a dispute about consent, you either have a monster and a victim, or you have a liar. And as we move forward, think about ways, how do you get education, growth, and rehabilitation, and ways in this binary environment. And so creating kind of new approaches and additional education to move this conversation forward is where we as a camp and as broader communities, I've seen a lot of discussion about the next levels of consent.
There's evolved advanced consent. It's a very nuanced thing. How do other panelists feel? Is that how your camps have addressed it? Or is it more binary? Andrea.
Yeah, I can jump in. I'm actually going to read it because our house and I live in an intentional community, and we have shared agreements around consent. And I really like the kind of evolution that you laid out, Lefty. And I would just add to that, we started defining consent culture and what it means to create a container in which there's a consent culture. And for us, consent culture is a culture in which asking for consent is normalized and condoned in popular culture. It is respecting the person's response, even if it isn't the response you had hoped for. living in a consent culture means not feeling weird or embarrassed to ask someone if they want to move forward. It means not feeling bad if you aren't interested anymore. Open dialogue and mutual respect for your partner, partners, and yourself will create a safe space for both or all of you. So I think it's also kind of thinking about what does it culturally mean to start to foster the type of communication that you need to be able to get to the point of even getting to a question or getting to an answer.
Thanks. I love that. That's, yeah, it's, I think a lot of people think of it as a transactional moment, right? Of yes or no in that moment in time, but a culture is so much more than just these single moments. Other panelists, I may call on some. I see Brian next and then Bianca, or actually Bianca, why don't you go first?
Okay, so in the literal sense of consent, it's to give permission to do something, for some kind of action. And so if you think of consent for any kind of action, not just sexually, not just in that sense, I like to sort of frame it as, would you ask permission to do whatever action it is in front of your grandmother? If you were at your grandmother's house and you wanted to do something, would you feel the need to ask, would that be appropriate to do there at your grandmother's house? Whatever you're thinking about the action being, would that be appropriate to do at your grandmother's house? And if it's not, then there's the need to ask permission. And so I think that's an interesting sort of way to frame it in terms of when it's appropriate to ask for permission for something. So go ahead, Brian.
Well, thank you, Bianca. That perfectly tees up what I was thinking, which was thinking about what might be offensive or triggering or harmful for the person you're engaging with. When I went to Burning Man for the first time in 2015, at the invitation of my daughter, I was going as a Christian priest, and the gift I wanted to give was a blessing. But you know, there are a lot of people at Burning Man that would be triggered by me barfing Jesus all over them in some form of something that I thought was a blessing and thought was awesome. But for them, it could be a horrible encounter. And because like it's too complicated to dial in consent in terms of like, is it okay if I pray about Jesus with you? I created a blessing that I felt would be sort of safe for theists or non-theists or atheists or people that have been wounded by the church. That was much, anyway, but it grew out of, so my grandmother would have been okay with that blessing, but the people at Burning Man may not have been okay with that blessing, but being sensitive to what's triggering for the people, like even if your gift, is this gift something that really would be a gift to the people I'm giving it to, or would it be an imposition or something harmful or triggering? So instead of asking sort of specific consent for a specific kind of prayer, I tried to make my gift as generally like warm as possible.
Yeah, I'm glad you're bringing that up, Brian. I mean, I'm actually curious for everyone tuning in, just show of hands, how many people have been offered a gift that you're in Black Rock City or at Burning Man that you're like, whoa, I don't know if I really want that. Raise your hand if that has happened to you, whether that's, you know, a hot dog or a hug or a blessing or, you know, a necklace. So it seems like most people have. And I think that when we tie it back to culture, it's about, you know, we have a gifting culture at Burning Man, but that's sort of tied with acceptance of that gift and consent of that gift too. We have a few more hands, so I'm gonna pick these hands in a second. Do any other panelists want to speak before I take, oh no, those hands were just saying, hey, I received something I didn't really want. Okay, got it. Any other panelists would like to define consent? How has that shown up for you or in your experience or with your camp? Stan Stan, do you want to go?
Yeah, I would, I'd echo everything that's been said about, like a social transaction or contract to create a safe space. I think it's also, at least in my experience, it's also, I think it's creating an atmosphere of, what is acceptable. So in that sense, you're setting boundaries. You really get to know very quickly who that person is when they say, I don't feel really comfortable with getting a hug. And it's like, totally cool. And I think what it does is it number one establishes a boundary, but it also establishes, hey, I'm a person who, sets boundaries. And I think that's a great thing.
Thanks, Stan. Yeah, so it's about boundaries, it's about culture, it's about knowing limits and what people being sensitive to that. I'm gonna throw another question out to our panelists. Where have you seen consent working? What are some examples or stories that you have of a situation where it really worked or works within your camp or amongst your peers? And maybe in ways that don't seem obvious. Andrea.
I can kick us off. One example came to mind immediately, and I can't take credit for this one, but I have been to a really great shibari and tea workshop, and they set the stage by doing a consent kind of like practice workshop. And we actually just, spent 30 minutes practicing. Someone would ask us for, say, a hug, and we'd say, actually, I would prefer just a high five. And kind of everyone in that space before entering into something where you might be asking to touch someone's body or to, do shibari with someone, we kind of practiced different ways of saying no and practiced what it felt like to give people alternatives and all of that. The other place that I've seen it go really well, which is kind of a tangent to the act of actually asking for consent, is in alternative justice, we've actually started a consent confessional. So these are events where people can show up and say, like, actually, I'm feeling really awful. I've violated someone's consent. It's an awful feeling to violate someone's consent. And it's very likely to happen in society. I think we have to almost normalize that consent violations do happen, to very different degrees. And those spaces, I think, have been extremely transformational in helping people process, get feedback, and find accountability. So I think those are the two examples that jump to mind for me.
Wow, consent confessional. Is that like a dark room where you talk to someone around behind a wall and it confess? How does that work?
No, fully undark room. I can likely share a link for some of the ones that we host. It's just a support circle. You can think of it as a support circle. Like we have support circles for other things that people struggle with, but it's kind of like a shame-free space for people to just talk about how it's going for them, and for people to process times that, it's really difficult when you get the feedback that you violated someone's consent. Like when someone comes up to you and is like, hey, I didn't consent into that, and you've done me a lot of harm. So having a space for people who've done that to kind of process, it was just a confidential space, and yeah, everyone brings something to talk about, and those have gone really well.
Thanks for painting that. I had a picture, and having actually a supportive space sounds better than a dark room. Stan.
So yeah, when I think about consent, this actually it's off Playa, but it's at our regional burn. This would have been several years ago. We always had a tradition when people would go to the greeter station that they get spanked. It wasn't necessarily sexual in nature, but it was nevertheless kind of this rite of passage to go into the event. And a lot of people felt really uncomfortable with that. And so they brought it up on Facebook, and it became what ended up being almost a 700 plus discussion about how do we change that? Do we get rid of the spanking greeting? And it became about consent, and everybody started to have this dialogue about consent. And at the time I was with, our camp at the regional burn, which was the jellyfish camp. And so we as a camp got together and said, well, look, we want to do the greeters shift, but how do we do it in a way that we can really honor consent and make it fun? Because at this point it had reached this epic level of people, like consent was on everybody's mind. And so we came up with the idea of creating a menu and a fake cafe called Cafe Consensual. So we printed out this wooden, almost a beautiful French menu with all of the different types of spankings that you could receive if you wanted to. And we said, look, we came up with, what we say to people, we say, hey, we're offering this. If you don't want it, that's totally fine. You can just go on through. But we wanted to turn it into something that, number one, took it out of the realm of people feeling like it was a sexual experience. And we ended up doing some really fun things. Like we had, one of them was the Yoda, where we would have, somebody stand in front of the other person, and then we'd secretly have somebody come from behind. We say, okay, do you consent to this? Yes, okay. And then the person standing in front would lower their hand, and then they get a spanking back, kind of like the force is giving you a spanking. People loved it. They responded to it because we were having fun with it, but we were very clear about the fact, even calling it Camp Consensual, it's like, look, we're gonna have fun with this, but you are absolutely not required to take part in this at all if you feel uncomfortable. And we just kind of laid that out in advance, and it went over really, really well because it was dialogue. It was dialogue driven. And yeah, I think that was the biggest success story that we had. And that entire time, it was on people's minds.
Yeah, I think you're bringing up a really great point, because a lot of times people feel like this topic is so serious and I have to be on my toes and watching my every move. But when you make it fun, it makes it a lot more accessible and makes people actually realize that, hey, actually this is a muscle I can work on all the time in fun ways and serious ways. Thanks for sharing that. Lefty, you're next.
Yeah, to build on that, less serious, it's normalizing the conversation. It's not just you speak up when there's a problem or an issue. Separating out our gift from our camp culture. And one thing that's very effective is do consent circles, do check-in circles, where at the beginning where you kind of go around the room and everyone speaks about what they like and if they like touch or not, or are you a hugger or are you this? Because one thing I think that happens around camps is you have a lot of people who are really close, who have a lot of pre-negotiated consent, and they may be able to walk up to somebody and smack them in a certain way. And that's okay. If you have someone new to the camp and they think that's camp culture, you just walk around and you can do that. It's like, no, you can't. And so saying all these things out loud, and the people who are the least likely to speak up if you say, do you have any questions, are also the least likely to speak up and tell you what they're uncomfortable with, unless you really do normalize it and give them the space. And, those people that are not strong with their nose, are just as dangerous to your camp culture as the people who are not good at hearing no. And we need to make sure we focus on both sides of that to make sure that things move smoothly.
Thanks, Lefty. Yeah, I think what I'm hearing is, also not only creating a culture and just facilitating the conversation and being transparent and normalizing it, but sometimes I wonder, like, how do people set boundaries? How do you make it clear that you have a boundary, or that there's a boundary that needs to be respected amongst a group of people? Bianca.
So I think it really comes down to camp meetings and camp leads in terms of having an awareness and opening up the opportunity ahead of time before camp to give people the opportunity to bring up boundaries, so then you can troubleshoot how you're going to bring in those boundaries to the camp setting. So as a mom, I always had an open conversations with our camp lead and around having a kid in our camp, what expectations were there coming from me. And as I am comfortable speaking in front of the group, I was able to speak about, like, okay, there is a child, here's what you need to be aware of. If you can help contribute to making sure that he's safe, if he runs off, this is our community and he's part of our community. So in looking out for each other, he's a little person, but we're still looking out for him. And, that's what was so important to me. But having that open dialogue as the camp lead and in your camp meetings leading up to Burning Man and at Burning Man. And also as an art car owner, I was always given a stage to be able to speak about what our boundaries are with the art car, what we allow, what we don't allow, and the safety precautions, not because we're trying to be strict leaders, but because we want everyone to be safe and enjoy the art car. So there were certain things and boundaries we needed to put in place, and those have to be clearly communicated. And having an open space to communicate those in a safe container where you can talk about it is really, critical to being respectful of those different sensitivities that different people might have.
Great, yeah. I'm curious, just another show of hands for everyone that's on the call. How many of you actually do a boundary setting consent conversation with your camp? Raise your hand if you do. It's okay if you don't. Just trying to get a poll. Okay, seems like maybe half the room. I'm curious to, okay, yeah, thanks for everyone for raising your hand. You can put them down now. I'm curious to just like, what feels like the hardest thing that you've noticed, when you hosted these conversations amongst our panel? If you've hosted it in your camp or amongst your group of friends or your family, where have people gotten stuck, and where, if people are saying, hey, this is a boundary for me, or it's hard for me to say a boundary around this. Curious how that looks for you all. I might pick someone. Brian, I haven't heard from you in a minute. And then looks like Stan would like to speak too.
So an issue that came up for us when we were planning our first burn as a camp, keeping in mind this is a camp of people that are religious as fuck. And I was going as a priest, and a member of my church was going as well. A young adult woman from my congregation. And we wrestled with the issue of nudity at camp. Because at Burning Man, there's implied consent for nudity out on the playa, but I didn't know if this parishioner would be comfortable with her priest running around nude, or if I would be comfortable seeing a parishioner nude. And because of our off-playa relationships don't disappear when we come on playa, we wrestled as camp leadership with how we were going to handle nudity. And what we ended up doing was, because we realized we didn't know how to get consent, and these people that were coming to camp didn't know each other. And we knew if we sat in a circle and said, does anyone mind if we're nude? Peer pressure would keep people's hands down or whatever. So because we didn't know how we could have that consent conversation with people that really didn't know each other well, we made a no nudity when in camp policy. So guests could come nude, and if you go out on the playa, you can be nude, but when we're hanging out in the living room as a family, right, there's a no nudity policy. And rather than having a conversation, we came up with a policy that sort of protected a boundary. But I'm curious, for camps that have done a better job at coming up with consent, like what other strategies are there for cracking that nut? So for us, it was around nudity at camp, and sort of because we were who we were, other things, other sexual things, we didn't even talk about because they weren't going to be an issue. We didn't think. Anyway.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I know that this question might be a little vulnerable too, because I'm asking, hey, what's been hard around asking for consent or coming to an agreement around it? I saw Stan earlier, and then I also see Andrea. So Stan, do you still want to speak?
Yeah, and mine's really quick. I think for the most part, it's been really interesting. Most of the campmates that we have, if not all of them, have really respected boundaries, really respected consent. And, I think the only challenges that we've ever faced had more to do with maybe making light of consent. And what I mean by that is, you'll always encounter the person who's like, I don't really feel comfortable, like, oh, I think we should maybe give consent if, somebody wants to hug you. And you would every once in a while hear somebody say, really? Really? Do you really need consent to do that? It's like, no, listen, absolutely. Consent is consent. Like it doesn't matter if it's in the bedroom. It doesn't matter if it's just like, I am not if you're not a hugger, why should you be, why should you be put in that situation? And we also brought it up in the context of, if people are going to be doing things that are maybe deemed illicit, please don't assume that everybody is on the same page with that. You need to, we need to create a safe environment, and we need to create a safe space. And if we're not doing that, even if we all know each other, there's always the potential there's going to be that one new person who comes into the camp. And yes, like to Brian's point and what he did, you may have to adjust and course correct. Oh, okay, we have a new person who's coming into the camp. We still want this to be a safe space. Let's figure something out. So I think it's just been the joking element of it. And I try to stop that pretty quickly, because it's like, you know what? Yeah, you may think it's not necessarily needed for a hug, but it is no less important.
Thanks. Andrea, and then Lefty.
Yeah. On the solution side, something we've had success with is one of our camp kind of leadership roles is an emotional ecologist, we call it. That's like assumed to help with things like talking with someone who's experienced a consent violation in or out of our camp. I would say our camp actually struggles more with people feeling their consent was violated outside of camp than within. I have three things that come to mind that we've dealt with, as we call them kind of failure modes to consent. One is tiring someone through asking them a lot for consent. I know I've been on the receiving end of this, which is kind of telling someone, oh, sorry, my computer's going out, telling someone no, and then having them just keep asking over and over again. And eventually it kind of can tire the person out. Another one that we've struggled with has been, let's see, not stewarding someone's initial, sorry, I'm just gonna switch cameras, not stewarding someone's initial intent. So that might look like knowing that someone doesn't really want something, but then they're on a substance, and then asking them when they're on, say, MDMA. So we made a word for that, which is like, if you know that someone generally does not want something, you should steward their initial intent instead of going with what they're saying right now while on a substance. And then the final one, I think, Lefty, you already spoke to, is people struggling with, some of us live together, we go to hot springs naked together, and it's amazing. And so other people are like, well, if you're down to do that with them, then you must be the type of person who likes that with everyone. And it's like, absolutely not. So seeing someone else's boundaries and assuming that it applies to everyone, also assuming reciprocity kind of goes hand in hand with that. Those are kind of the failure modes that we've had, and kind of documenting those for us has been helpful, and giving them some language so that when it happens, it's a bit easier to deal with.
Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I saw a lot of nodding heads actually as you're going through that list.
Yeah.
Lefty has his hand up, and then we'll take Bianca, and then we'll just keep the discussion flowing. I have some more questions.
No,
Going.
I'll be quick because Andrea, you said my list basically. You know, as a camp that gives 5,000 consent talks to burners, you know, we have, but internally you asked what the question is, what do we have struggled with? One is, what do you have if you have a camp member who's following all the rules and asking, but asked 3 times? Or all of a sudden there's a sexy moment and everyone's having fun and maybe they're not wearing clothes. And then that's the moment you say, hey, can I take your picture? And you're kind of like, you're not really part of this. You know, you weren't asking me 10 minutes ago when I had my clothes on. Why are you asking me now? You know, substances, you know, the people that do great with consent. And then when they've been drinking a lot or whatever else, the next thing you know, they're not as great. But the one thing I want to add is the bias side of it is we come in with our own ideas of what we would consent to. And being able to tell the difference between something that is wrong and non-consensual and something we wouldn't consent to. And we see that with the lots of people that come into our space, and, you know, our moderators, we're supposed to step in and, you know, and make sure everything is safe and, you know, making sure you're not wrong, that you're not the one who's just thinks, hey, they shouldn't be doing that because I wouldn't want to do that. But, and also our bias towards, you know, we had to, you know, remove a few women from our camp, but we were really slow to notice that they were doing behavior that would not have been accepted by a guy, period, end of story. You know, grabbing a man grabbing a woman by the arm and saying, come on, I'm gonna kick you in the dome, and then teasing them if they didn't want to go in with them. You know, we laughed at it for a few seconds longer than we should have before we realized, hey, that is not okay. You know, we would never have accepted a man doing that to a woman, but a woman doing that to a guy, you know, didn't seem as, you know, because, and so again, thinking through your own biases and making sure that you are seeing it from all angles is something that I think is more difficult.
Yeah, and it kind of relates. I think Andrea was mentioning reciprocity too, right? Like that you assume that if it's okay with the other person, it's okay with you. I think Bianca was next.
Yeah, this was kind of maybe circling back to Brian's topic, or just an idea for general camps, is that we're toying with within our camp in the past, was having a, like, just like you have a kitchen lead and a build lead and a camp lead, having a emotional moderator person who is your communication, disputes, struggles, kind of like your camp therapist. That's the person that anyone can go to, that's a safe space to try to work something out, that doesn't bring that issue to your camp lead who's dealing with so much, or, you know, maybe it's just emotionally, you know, challenging, or it's a consent issue, or it's having that person that's dedicated as your go-to within your camp, so that when someone does have an issue, a struggle, there's someone who's this moderator who's trained, you know, whoever it is in your camp, that is really good at communication, is open to listening, is, you know, that good person at sort of mediating situations. But having that as a dedicated position within your camp, and how much that could help to resolve and make it more of a safe space, knowing that there's someone that you can go to if you're that quiet person that doesn't want to speak up in a camp meeting, you know, and, you know, maybe going to a camp lead is a little bit daunting. If from the beginning of your first experience with the camp, you know that there's this safe person you can go to, I think that kind of opens the door for better communication. And, you know, you can make that look however you like, but I just think that's a really interesting idea that could be developed more.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I think a lot of times people have like a designated camp lead that all roads lead back to, and they often don't have the bandwidth to deal with it, even if they have big hearts and want to. So that's a really good point. It reminds me of, in facilitation of meetings, sometimes it's good to have a designated person as like a vibes watcher to just get the temperature of the room. If it seems like people are tired, let's maybe get a break or a stretch going. But from a camp perspective, it's like obviously the management of a whole community and group. I want to kind of go back to an idea that was brought up a little while ago about, we're talking a lot about your camp culture, your community, your family, your group. But some of these encounters around boundaries being crossed or not being set and not being honored are happening outside of camp and outside of the communities you manage. How amongst our panelists, how would you recommend that people communicate their boundaries to a stranger, to someone that maybe you're out on the open playa together? I think that's where a lot of people probably struggle personally. Do you wear a button that says ask for consent and like make it really clear? Do you, how do you bring that up in a way that that works? How have you maybe just, any examples of that you've seen that really working? Brian, I see you unmuting yourself, so go for it.
Yeah, I just want to shout out for a comment that Rat Lady made earlier about someone in her camp that didn't want to be hugged and felt awkward refusing hugs, so changed their playa name to please don't hug me.
That's great. Yeah. Very direct, very, very clear. Yeah, but how can people do that? I think that when you don't have full control over the culture of everyone in Black Rock City or everyone that you come across in your everyday life. Lefty, I think I saw you raise your hand.
Honestly, I think we're too polite. Most of us are very nice people, and we tend to not like conflict, and we tend to just kind of laugh off little things, and that allows those things to permeate and happen. And we need to, no one is entitled to us giving them a 10-minute explanation as to why we don't like that, but a quick and decisive, that is not okay, you did not have my consent, do not do that ever again to anyone without knowing. And just say that, and then turn away from them and go back to what you're doing. But if we make that cost higher of those consent violations, then I believe that those will stop. And and the other way is, obviously, if we educate everyone in our camp about what the rules are about consent and what you do it, they're probably going to behave better when they're out on the playa in somebody else's camp. And so I think things like this are important for that process.
Yeah, it almost reminds me of the concept of radical candor, right? Just calling it out, saying what it is, not sugarcoating it, not dancing around it, not being too polite. Bianca.
So I think there's, to some extent, that it's like when you're out in the open, you are giving people permission to go about their business however they please, and your choice to be there and be around something is giving, to some extent, permission for things like, might be like nudity, or it might be like something that comes to mind for me is smoking cigarettes. Like we never allowed people to smoke cigarettes on our art car. And if there was someone like lingering right by the art car and there's a ton of smoke going into it, I know it bothers me enough. It bothers me for it to be around my child, that I know, and I have the confidence to politely ask, is there any way you would mind just moving your smoking over a little bit? It's disrupting us in whatever that way is. And I think the more that you approach people with those things, and you approach them in a like kind and loving way, so it's not a terrible interaction, then maybe they become more aware of whatever action it is they're doing that might be disrupting other people in other situations. So I think that's like sort of one way to approach it. And it's like, if it's something that bothers you, we have to practice being more confident in standing up for ourselves. And that's something that we should learn to do in all settings in the world, you know, in life. And I agree, we're all very non-confrontational. So it's challenging because we don't want to, you know, ruffle any feathers, but this is our life and our being. And so we should work on standing up for what's important to us and making others aware of that.
Yeah, that's great. Does anyone have specific tips on how to do that? Like, I think we probably know, great, we need to set a boundary, we need to communicate that. But then you might just be shell-shocked and in a situation where you don't know how to pull that muscle. I'm curious what tips there are. Andrea.
Yeah, I have a few tips along multiple ends of the spectrum. I would say for me, something that was really helpful was practicing saying no when I didn't need it. Like, it just is a practice. Like, I wasn't necessarily raised at being great at saying no. I'm Colombian. We don't particularly raise Colombian women to be super assertive towards men. But I practiced it. Like, I had a friend sit with me and we practiced like asking each other for stuff and saying like, no, I don't want that. And so practicing it when you don't need it, so that when you do need it, you've already kind of done it. And a good way of practicing that can be like someone offering you a drink, or having someone offer, you know, pair your campmates up and say like, you're going to offer to give this person a massage and you're going to say no. And just practicing saying no to different types of interactions. For me, something that's also been really helpful is finding alternatives that I consistently know I will feel okay with. So like, some random dude comes up to me and is like, hey, I want a hug, and I don't, I know I can consistently be like, how about a high five? And then I can walk away quickly. And I feel a lot better offering some form of connection. And I know a high five is something that I'm generally always going to feel okay with. On the very other end of the spectrum, I think it's also cool to know that you're like not great yet at asserting boundaries. And two things that I think help on that end of the spectrum are, one, like sometimes finding someone else who feels safer in the situation, who knows where you kind of lie in these things. So like, I might find it really intimidating to deal with a very large inebriated male person. Like, that is a scary situation for me. I think society has conditioned me to be scared of that with good reason. And so having some people who know what it's like to show up as allies for other people, I think is great. And then the other one, and I really questioned saying this one, but it truthfully is something that I do, is I just know what camps at Burning Man are really good at consent, and I avoid the ones that I know aren't. And with my queer and my POC friends and my female friends, I share that information with them. And I know it sounds bad, but it works. Like, I know Gender Blender is amazing at consent, and I'm going to have a great experience there. And so I think it also is okay to kind of like know what camps are great at this. And, you know, we should get that feedback back to those other camps. But in the meantime, it's okay to kind of be self-protective if you need to be.
Thank you, Andrea. Those are really great tips. You're also pointing at this thing that I think has to be acknowledged, which is consent is about power, right? Who has power in that situation? Are we assuming a lot more power and privilege in a situation or not? And how does that play out based on also lines of gender and sexuality and race and et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, I'm curious other folks who might have tips about it. And then I see you, Lefty, I'll get there in a second. we'll start shifting into kind of opening up the conversation. So if any other panelists have other tips to share, please just raise your hand and we'll put you in the queue, and then we'll start opening up to the group. So Lefty and then Stan.
Just really quick. One way to prevent consent issues in your camp is do a really good job of vetting who is in your camp. Prevent the problem before you have it. Don't compromise. Don't let that person you have questions about. There's no right for somebody to camp with you. If you think they give off a little bit of a weird vibe, don't invite them in. Don't compromise and invite them in just because they have a thing that your camp might need or a skill that your camp might need. And if they give you any of those feelings, you don't want to spend 10 days with them. Just don't let them in. Take that role of preventing the problem and preventing the problem for others.
Yeah, I hear that tip in general around a lot of things, not just consent. People that will pull their weight, people that will volunteer for things. But yeah, I think that's a great tip all around. Stan.
It's interesting when you talk about like, how do you approach people or how do you say no? I struggle with it. But one of the situations that I face that is kind of unique to me, and I face it just every day, so I've gotten what I think really good at it, is I use a wheelchair. And so very often I will have people just jump in and either start pushing me, or they will want to grab me and like lift me, and I have to do the the Ghostbusters, the whoa 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 whoa. So I kind of do that, and I've had to kind of think about it in terms of using it as like an educational, like an opportunity to educate or to inform and say, oh, whoa, hang on, don't push me. Here's why. And usually people are like, oh, wow, okay, cool. So it's a different type of consent. It's a different kind of situation that is probably only unique to me, but it's hard because people want to be helpful. And so I don't want to, begrudge them that. But at the same time, it's like, well, you have to understand, when you come up and push me, I could fall out of my chair, right? Because of balance and because of a whole lot of other things. And I don't want to do that. And you probably hate that. So here's why it's really important to just ask for permission. So I bring that up with a lot of people when it comes to accessibility. I just say, hey, look, always ask somebody if you can help them. And I think that's kind of one of those weird things about like consent is help. Like we don't think about getting consent in help, but it is just as critical. So.
Yeah, thank you so much for raising that. I think I didn't throw this question out there, but we've sort of inherently touched upon multiple ways that consent shows up. It's not just hugs and it's not just kisses and things like that, not just touch, but also help. Thank you for making that clear. I'm gonna shift gears now, and I would love to kind of allow the audience to ask questions. I saw some, but Christian, do you want to maybe dish one out to start with?
Sure, Lovell. We have a question from Jandy, and basically, how do other camps select or determine a camp guardian? Due to its sensitive nature, it's not exactly a role that anybody can take on. I love the idea of it being a role for the camp. So that's our question.
Yeah, we had a couple folks that mentioned it, Bianca and Andrea. Do you have any thoughts about that? And it's also a lot for one person to take on. So if there's multiple people that could do that within the camp, I think that's probably a good idea. The emotional labor is a lot. Yeah. Any of our panelists have a response to that? Bianca?
I mean, any role should, in some way, someone should have some sort of qualifications, training, experience working around that concept. So I think, a lot of people in the Burning Man community have done, there's no shortage of coaches. self-help coaches. But if you don't have one of those people in your camp who's a coach of some sort, then someone who's gone through a lot of that, a significant amount of that training for themselves, for their own well-being, might be qualified in it. I mean, someone who's a therapist, someone who's a counselor in school settings. And so, I mean, within your camp, people are always, looking for ways to show up powerfully in a camp. And so I think when you present those options, and, maybe it looks different for everyone, but a lot of times in camp, when we create roles, we come up with the idea for the role and it looks like one thing on paper. And then once you put it out there, it develops into something a little bit different. But giving people that opportunity to rise to the occasions, that might be the exact thing that, the quiet introvert who, just kind of keeps to themselves, maybe they blossom into this incredible emotional guardian, for your camp. So I just think there's a great opportunity within that for someone to contribute.
Yeah, I love that too, because I know within my camp, the people that do the power and that build the shower are not natural shower builders, right? You can learn this stuff. You can raise your hand and say, hey, I really want to play this role. Let's just make it clear that it's a role. Brian, I think you unmuted yourself.
Yeah, I was just going to say, someone with high emotional intelligence who's been to the burn for a few times, so they're not freaking out themselves, could be a good candidate. The problem we have at our camp is everyone would be a great chaplain or whatever, but no one can swing a hammer. So we just need a few engineers.
And I think that speaks to us as a larger community. And I had noticed in the chat earlier, someone was talking about BED, Bureau of Erotic Discourse, going around and hosting talks within camps and actually training people about how to do this and going through exercises and stuff. So, if we have a source of chaplains that could be shared, I think that's something that we just need to kind of elevate and help people learn about. And I love that we're even getting there in this conversation. Probably some ideas are being sparked about, new role in our camp of leadership. Any other thoughts about that question? If not, we can kind of jump into the next question. Yeah, why don't we do that? I don't see anyone jumping in. So Christian.
Okay, we have a question and a comment from Rat Lady, and it's, how do you deal with people who just don't understand? The example is, one year someone was helping me by going through my truck and throwing out what I didn't need, and I never understood, or they didn't understand why that wasn't okay. So what would our panelists say about how to deal with people who just don't understand consent?
Yeah, thanks for sharing that experience, Rat Lady. Yeah, thoughts. How do you help people know that this is important? I'm assuming everyone feels that it's important. That's why you showed up to this call today. But there's a lot of people that aren't on this call that may need a nudging.
I have a thought on that. Kind of using that example. I think a lot of times when we give people feedback, we are trying to get them to agree with our values. And actually what you need in that moment is someone to change their behavior. And if you can let go of trying to get someone to agree with your values, you'll probably get the behavior thing solved pretty quickly. So generally you can point out to someone like, hey, when you toss my stuff, I'm having a bit of an anxiety attack here. I feel super anxious. Is it okay if you let me handle my things moving forward? And so kind of giving people feedback and telling them, hey, we don't have to agree. Like, you can still think that all of this is too much stuff, but what I do need is for you to understand that that behavior is not okay for me. And making it about the behavior and not about the person or about the values is gonna just like make it so much faster. And it's okay to not get to that point of value alignment, essentially.
Thanks, Andrea. Stan.
Yeah, and I think that's a great question, Ratlady, because help, again, like I talked about earlier, I think help is one of those really challenging things where I think people go into these situations with the best of intentions, like really trying to help out. And it's like, what? And you know, it is hard because, you know, the real question is, are you going to tell somebody, or are you going to say, hey, I don't really feel comfortable with you doing that? And they're just going to suddenly go, oh, you've completely changed my perspective on consent, and now I'll never do that again. The reality of that is probably that's not going to happen. So, you know, you have to just communicate that as best you can. I think the communication is also a challenge too, because if you think about how you communicate out on the playa on a really good day when you're well rested and feeling great, and you're, you know, and then on day 7 or 8 when you're exhausted, you've had some bad experiences, how does your communication change? And there is a savvy to how we communicate. I mean, I'm still learning it, you know. If somebody does something you don't agree with and you just, you know, attack them verbally, it's going to be a little bit different outcome than if you go, hey. And I always try to kind of soften the blow whenever I'm trying to educate people or talk to them and say, hey, look, you know, just to let you know, this is really uncomfortable for me. It doesn't really help me out, but I have an idea. Like if you can just ask for, you know, permission, that would really be helpful, and would help a lot of people out. And I try to do it in a very gentle, soft, Forrest Gump feather landing on a shoe way. And I find that helps. But at the end of the day, people are either going to get it or they're not going to get it, or they're not going to want to get it. And that might be out of our control.
Thanks, Dan. All right, let's take, I think we have time for maybe one more question. Christian, do we have any more?
We do, yes. So the question revolves about setting boundaries on board art cars specifically. So maybe is Bianca our panelist with the art car experience? Maybe Bianca could answer that.
Yeah, so we train all of our campmates that are part of our art car on all of our rules and boundaries, and we are constantly on the lookout for people violating those boundaries for their safety. People jumping on and off is not okay. If there's someone approaching, trying to jump on, we have people at every entrance that are like on the lookout, that are like, no, that's not okay. Or they will call to the driver to stop the vehicle if it seems like someone's going to be attempting to jump on or off. And so that's one thing, but also there's the actual like liability aspect of what's okay and what's not okay. Is there's people's safety, and there's also the BLM and, you know, our actual safety as drivers who could get arrested if there's someone, you know, doing drugs or drinking alcohol in the cabin. Like, you know, there's different, you know, risks that we all have to decide that we are okay with, and we need to communicate those to those who are in our group so that we can all be on the lookout and all watch out for each other's safety. Because even though when we're on playa and we feel like we're safe and we feel like we're out in this wonderful world, there is still BLM. They're still there regulating it just like the police are, you know, in our regular communities, and we have to be aware of that. And so I think that that's an important topic, because I think that a lot of people sort of forget, and everyone's like laissez-faire, but that's an important topic even within camp. You know, like, what are your rules about, you know, that you want everyone to be safe in camp? And same with, you know, drug use and open drug use in camp. We don't want to open the door to have the whole camp get raided because of one person's negligence. And so we have to communicate that. It's not something that we can just brush under the rug and pretend like doesn't happen. So that's a really important topic that to me personally, as I've dealt with BLM and arrests at Burning Man very closely. And I don't want anyone to have to go through what we've gone through. And so I just want people to be aware of that within your camp, within art cars. Don't be afraid to put down those boundaries, because it's a price that you do not want to pay. And it's a reality.
Yeah, I think that's I'm glad whoever raised that question brought it up, because I think people feel like, oh, art cars are public transportation. It's just like I can just jump on, and not realizing that it's a gift, and it's a gift that the gifter actually has to consent for you to receive too.
And we actually got to the point of that we have you could say consent, a contract, a liability waiver for everyone that's part of our specific art car camp or art car group, with just to take some liability off of us, that you are aware of what our rules are, you promise, you are going to follow them, if you get hurt, because we feel like we're outside of the legal system, and even just getting sued for someone's negligence on your art car is a real possibility. And it's like, you hate to bring that in, but that's another form of consent. It's getting that upfront consent form. And I mean, it might be a smart move for some camps to do as well. I know it's not a pretty subject, but whoever is the lead, whoever brought that piece of art, say it's an art piece that's, part of your camp. I don't know. It's just another idea and topic of a way to protect yourself and make sure everyone's, read the rules, understands what the rules are around this item they're working on. And, maybe that's using machinery, not intoxicated, like Rat Lady mentioned. That's a rule. If you're going to be using our camp machinery, then you're going to follow these rules, and you're going to sign this waiver that says that you are going to abide by these rules. And it's just another level of reinforcement that it's better to be safe and take those necessary steps, even though those conversations aren't wonderful and it's not great. But I think that's an interesting add-on to this consent conversation.
Yeah. I noticed that PETA brought up the question, and PETA has an art car in her camp too. I don't know if PETA, do you want to say anything about how you would answer this question?
Well, I asked it just because, it's something, as I really appreciate, Bianca, everything you said. It just like very much resonated. And it's that fine line of allowing people to enjoy the gift, but then also establishing those boundaries. And, honestly, that includes having sex on the car in front of other people, which, I've had to kind of like kick people as they're like going for it. I'm like, this is not the place, guys. Do you see there's like people around here? And so, I think it just comes down to our need to establish boundaries, which sometimes, and again, our free-for-all playa, it's kind of a hard thing to do. It may not be the popular thing to do, but I think we just need to establish those boundaries for people's safety, and out of respect for everybody who's enjoying the gift. So thanks for your response.
Yeah, I think one of the, we brought this up early on about setting a culture for your camp and setting a culture in general. I think with Burning Man too, I think that a lot of folks, especially people that are going for the first time, have this sense of freedom and experiencing something so new and so boundless that they don't realize that actually there is a culture here around consent. There's a culture here around valuing people's boundaries. And I think that that's, amongst all the zillion of things to read about how to prepare for Burning Man, I think that this is absolutely one of those topics too. So it's you know, the reason you can feel this free is because actually there are a lot of boundaries. We are coming close to the end. I did want to allow, is there anyone just that hasn't spoken yet that wants to share a story about how consent has shown up in your camp, or, you know, a challenge you've had or a success you've had with this topic? It'd be great to hear from just maybe one last person. I'm not noticing anyone, and that's okay. Buttercup, did you?
Yeah, I can say something. I put it in the chat earlier, but you know, it just got me thinking about all the different kinds and types of consent from art cars. Like you guys were just talking about, our camp has had huge art cars. Now we have smaller art cars. And there's even that. People will just stop by camp and jump on the hood, you know, and lay on the hood to take photos. And we're like, hey, please get off the hood of the car. Two things with my dad. My dad also goes to Burning Man with me and works for the dock team for Burning Man. And so that's part of his job, you know, out there. He does have like a list and a job of things he has to do, and it's take photos. And there's even consent of that, because there may be, so, you know, someone doing something and it's a super awesome photo, or there's something that he needs to take, and there's still that consent that he has to ask as well of, you know, and he's got his badges and lanyards on, and it's still that consent of, can I take your photo, you know, for Burning Man, because it could end up on the internet and could end up other places. And I think sometimes, you know, even that's a thing we don't think. We just see something really cool. Maybe we see, you know, often you see people out there kind of doing like performance art or dance, and it's really beautiful and you want to take that photo, but kind of remembering to add that consent in as well to it.
Thanks, Buttercup. Yeah, you gave another great example of where consent is really important. Photos on Playa. All right, we are down to our last couple minutes, and I want to honor people's time. So I'm going to wrap it up with tonight's panel conversation. So first, thank you to everyone for showing up tonight and taking part in this conversation, listening actively, and speaking if you did speak. Thank you to our panelists who you know, shared your wealth of information. I know there are a lot of tips that I'm going to be looking back on to figure out how to incorporate in my life, in my camp, with my community. So hope you all have taken away some things too. I did also want to thank our Campfire Talks production team. If you want to just like wave to the camera, if you have helped produce this, we have regular Brian, Christian, Brady Cat, PETA. I might be missing someone. I apologize. But thank you. You know, we are trying to put this on monthly to bring camps together. Oh, Monday, I forgot, is also part of the team. To bring camps together, especially in this time when we can't come together in person. We're gonna have a whole another year of this. So there is gonna be more Campfire Talks to come to. So I really appreciate everyone doing that. My last announcement before you all go, or last two. One, there's a feedback form. I noticed that Brady Cat and some other folks were sharing that. Please fill that out. We do want to know what other things people want to discuss. We have so many things to talk about as burners. And so we really want to hear that and make this go well for everyone. And then on May 22nd, Saturday, May 22nd is this year's Camp Symposium, formerly known as Theme Camp Symposium, but you know, lots of people camp at Burning Man, not just theme camps, so we're calling it the Camp Symposium. We have really great kind of panels and really great things lined up. There is a ticket that is a $10 minimum with a suggested $25 donation. It is on the Kindling site. If you go to kindling.burningman.org, you will see the Camp Symposium, this logo there. Yeah, there's more panels, more talks like this. We're gonna try to make it really fun as well. It's gonna go from about 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Pacific time. So it's a full day. And we're expecting hundreds of people there. So I hope you're amongst those hundreds. Yeah, with that, I will call it a night. Thank you again for showing up today. We will not be having a campfire talk in May because of the Camp Symposium. A lot of energy is going to produce that. But we'll kick this back up again in June. So I hope you all have a wonderful evening or morning, wherever you are, and can practice some more consent in your life, starting after we end this call. So thank you all.
Later level, good job.
Feel free to unmute and say